Let's talk about the architecture of paranoia. Not the casual worry, not the anxiety of the common man, but the kind of profound, all-consuming suspicion that can only be cultivated in the rarefied air of absolute power. It's a mindset where the world ceases to be a place of random events and becomes a dense, intricate text where every detail, a glance held a second too long, a door left slightly ajar, the taste of your own whiskey, is a potential sentence in a plot against your life. For a man like Alphonse Scarface Capone, at the vertiginous height of his reign over Chicago in the late 1920s, paranoia wasn't a symptom of madness. It was the most rational operating system available. It was a necessary software for navigating a world where he had made himself the ultimate prize, the sun at the center of a solar system of greed, fear, and hatred. He trusted no one, and in doing so, he trusted his instincts absolutely. So, on an otherwise unremarkable evening in the private suite of his Lexington Hotel headquarters, when he took a sip of his usual bootleg Scotch and a faint, discordant note, a bitterness, a metallic whisper, touched his tongue, the world didn't just pause. It sharpened into a deadly, crystalline focus. He didn't spit it out. He didn't rage. He placed the glass down, slowly, the crystal clicking softly on the mahogany. He looked at the amber liquid, then at the empty room. Al Capone frowned at the taste of his whiskey. It was a deviation from the routine, a flaw in the perfect violent symphony of his day. And in his world, flaws were not accidents. They were declarations of war. What happened next wasn't just a mob hit. It was a dark poem on the nature of power, suspicion, and the horrifying efficiency of man who could turn a fleeting taste on his palate into a death sentence in the cellar. The bartender, the man who had poured that glass, was found in the wine cellar, but not drinking, not hiding, found. And the state in which he was found was a message, written in a language only Chicago's underworld could fluently read. To understand the weight of that sour note, you must first understand the sanctity of Capone's inner circle. By 1928, Capone wasn't just a gangster. He was a head of state operating a parallel government. The Lexington Hotel, Suite 430, was his Kremlin, his White House. Access was a sacrament. The men who served his food, poured his drinks, drove his car. They were more than staff. They were human locks, living components of a security apparatus. Their loyalty wasn't assumed. It was purchased at an astronomical price and enforced with the promise of apocalyptic violence. The bartender, a man named Leo Vintner, had held that post for 3 years. He was a quiet, efficient Finn who knew Capone's preference down to the brand of imported soda he used as a chaser. He was part of the furniture, a trusted piece of the landscape, which is precisely why that hint of bitterness was so profoundly treasonous. It wasn't that an enemy had gotten close. It was that the environment itself, the very air and liquid of Capone's sanctuary, had been compromised. The poison, if it was poison, was almost incidental. The real attack was a violation of the routine, the proof that the inner sanctum was permeable. Capone's paranoia, in that instant, was validated. And a validated paranoia is the most dangerous force on earth. What followed the placing of that glass was a silent, clinical process. Capone did not yell for his guards. He did not have Vintner dragged in immediately. He summoned his personal physician and his most trusted lieutenant, Frank the Enforcer Nitti. The doctor, with trembling hands, took the glass, sniffed it, and later would conduct tests that found inconclusive results. A faint trace of something acidic, perhaps a cleaner not fully rinsed, perhaps a tainted batch from the distillery. But for Capone, the perhaps was a poison. The ambiguity was the threat. In his calculus, the intention was what mattered. Someone, whether Vintner or a shadow behind him, had intended to disrupt the universe of Al Capone, and that intention demanded a response of absolute pedagogical clarity. Nitti, a man whose voice was rarely raised above a murmur, was given the task. There were to be no questions asked in front of the other staff, no public spectacle. This was not about extracting a confession. It was about administering a theorem. The theorem was simple. A breach of trust in the core equals eradication from the root. We don't know what Leo Vintner said when Nitti's men took him from behind the bar that night. Perhaps he protested his innocence, blaming a dirty glass. Perhaps he broke down and named a name. a rival outfit that had offered him money to slip a substance into the boss's drink. Perhaps he was simply utterly bewildered. The historical record offers only the stark, final punctuation. He was found in the hotel's basement wine cellar. The specific details of his condition are the stuff of whispered legend. The tools of his own trade turned against him, a symbolic and brutal signature. The message was not just you poisoned the drink, but you defiled the ritual, and so you become part of the cellar's stock, a vintage of betrayal. His body was a frozen scream and devoid of Capone's suspicion, a warning etched in flesh to every other faceless man who might hold a bottle or a plate. The consequences rippled out in two distinct waves. The first was internal, a chilling effect of absolute zero. Among Capone's inner circle and service staff, trust evaporated completely, replaced by a robotic, terrorized efficiency. Men watched each other, not for loyalty, but for the slightest slip that might be misinterpreted. The Lexington Hotel became a gilded tomb of silence. The second wave was external, a calculated piece of propaganda. The story of the bartender in the cellar was allowed to leak. It wasn't shouted from the rooftops, but it seeped into the fabric of the underworld's gossip. It told Capone's enemies a terrifying story. This man's senses are so sharp he can taste betrayal. His response is so swift and intimate that it happens in the same building where he sleeps. You cannot touch him. You cannot even approach the tools of his daily life. The attempt itself, successful or not, is a death sentence written in the very environment of your failure. The legacy of that glass of whiskey is a masterclass in the epistemology of power. Capone demonstrated that for the autocrat, perception is not just reality. It is the only governing principle. He didn't need forensic proof. The off-taste was the evidence. The suspicion was the verdict. The cellar was a courtroom, and the execution chamber combined. He took a subjective, sensory experience, a bad taste, and objectified it into an act of lethal policy. This is the ultimate expression of a power, so total, it can bend the very nature of evidence to its will. In doing so, he also exposed the profound fragility of that power. It was so dependent on perfect control, so allergic to the unexpected, that a single sour note in a drink could trigger a chain reaction ending in a grotesque murder. The empire was vast, but its alarm system was the tip of one man's tongue. In the end, the story isn't really about poison or a bartender or even Al Capone. It's about the moment power becomes so dense it collapses on itself, creating a black hole of suspicion from which not even light or reason or mercy can escape. Leo Vintner may or may not have been guilty, but in the universe Al Capone ruled, guilt was irrelevant. There was only the taste of the whiskey and the sound, soon after, of a man being led down to the cellar to become a permanent part of its chilling vintage. Capone didn't just punish a man that night. He turned his own paranoia into a law of physics, proving that in his kingdom, a flawed sip was a capital crime, and the sentence was always served in the dark, quiet places where the wine was supposed to age and where men who made mistakes were forever stored. This transformation of suspicion into a natural law created a new, terrifying ecology within the Capone organization. The whiskey incident didn't just result in a dead bartender. It instituted a regime of hyper-vigilant pre-crime. Frank Nitti, the cool administrator of violence, likely established new, Byzantine protocols. Glasses were to be washed 3 times in front of a witness. Bottles were to be opened only in the presence of 2 men, each tasting a minuscule amount from the same batch before it ever reached the boss's suite. The men who handled the ice, the soda, the lemon peel. They became prisoners of each other's gaze, a chain of mutually assured destruction where any slip by one could mean death for all. The Lexington Hotel staff were no longer employees. They were inmates in a gilded prison. Their every movement a potential death sentence, their loyalty enforced not by paychecks, but by the omnipresent, sour ghost of a whiskey they never touched. Capone, in his quest for absolute security, had engineered a system of such stifling, reflexive fear that it likely became more dangerous to serve him than to plot against him. The very act of preparing his drink became a high-wire act over the cellar's void. This internal chilling effect had a paradoxical impact on the empire's external stability. While it broadcast an image of inviolable control, it also made the organism brittle. Innovation and initiative, the lifeblood of any expanding criminal enterprise, were strangled who would propose a new racket, suggest a new alliance, or even report a minor problem if the mere act of speaking could be misinterpreted as a critical flaw in the perfect system. The organization began to function on autopilot, capable of immense defensive violence, but increasingly incapable of the strategic agility that had built it. Capone's genius had always been a blend of brutal force and shrewd, opportunistic intelligence. Now, the intelligence half was being drowned out by the static of his own suspicion. He was becoming a prisoner in his own sensory bunker, ruling an empire where the primary export was fear, and the only confirmed import was the untainted taste of his next drink. The legacy of the bartender in the cellar, therefore, is not one of strength, but a profound and revealing weakness. It is the story of power reaching its event horizon. Capone demonstrated that the ultimate logical conclusion of autocratic rule is not order, but a self-consuming silence. He could enforce a rule that prevented a poisoned drink, but in doing so, he poisoned the well of trust and fluid intelligence that sustained his reign. The incident was a grotesque masterpiece of deterrence, but it was also a symptom of terminal isolation. The man who had once moved through Chicago with a flamboyant public confidence was now reduced to a connoisseur of his own potential murder, a palate so finely tuned to betrayal that it could no longer taste the sweetness of loyalty or the complex flavor of reality. In the end, the sour note in the whiskey wasn't a threat from an enemy. It was a first crack in the monolith of Capone's own mind, an early warning that the empire was no longer expanding outward, but collapsing inward around the singular, paranoid sensorium of its king. The cellar didn't just hold a body. It held the future of the Capone syndicate, cold, dark, and slowly settling into a permanent, silent vintage of its own making.